What is up, Sales Nation? In this video, we're diving through the 6 laws of influence and how they can make an incredible impact on your ability to close deals in B2B sales. You're going to win more business after watching this video. If you haven't already, make sure you click subscribe and join Sales Nation today. Right, let's jump in. And the influence techniques that we're about to discuss, they work because our brains like to take shortcuts. Essentially, we're just real lazy. Our brains do lots of processing day to day, which require crazy amounts of physical energy. And so when our brain can fall back on a set of rules rather than physically doing any processing, it makes our lives easier. This all comes back to the fact that our brains run very literally on sugar. And so from a survival perspective, the less processing that we have to do, when we can just get these small tasks and take them off the table completely, the less need that we have for this once, obviously it's here everywhere now, but it was once a scarce resource in sugar. And some people start picking up on the skill set of influence at an early age, and they use it unconsciously to get stuff done as an adult. They perhaps learn this from others, such as their parents who are great at influencing, or their peers who had already learned the skills of influence to get what they want in life as well. For other people, such as myself, I had to learn these skills from someone telling me about them, from reading books, from putting in the hard work. But once you get them down, you can put them into practice very quickly and have huge benefits in both B2B sales and just life in general. We're trying to influence other people around us all the time. And so they're really powerful and practical. Because when I first got into sales, medical device sales, I've worked for some of the biggest companies in that space. Well, I had to learn the hard way. I had to learn from being rejected, from being hounded by my sales manager. Then I started reading a ton of books, and then I started consuming all the terrible content that's out there for B2B sales professionals. It's literally the reason why I started this and the sales school and the podcast and everything that I'm doing now. When I started the podcast, for example, there was just no content out there on an audio format for salespeople. The only content that was there was 2, 3, 4 B2B sales gurus or quote unquote experts. You know, you can debate amongst yourselves whether they're experts or not. But essentially these people just bashing heads and complaining, and cold calling is the only answer, social selling is the only answer. That's why I created the podcast, for me as just a B2B salesperson like yourself, to be able to ask the questions that I know you want to know the answers to, because I want to know the answers to them as well. And from there, I created the Sales School, which gets updated with an in-depth workshop, 1-2 hours long, every single week. In fact, the content in this very video itself is a super light version of the influence workshop that we've got in the Sales School. The Sales School helps people not just hit their sales targets by giving them the boring sales skills that we all need to acquire, but it gives our members, the sales legends in the Sales School, everything they need, including one-to-one unlimited email coaching from people like myself who have been there and done it, so that they can really thrive in sales. Now, back to influence. And when you watch this video, at a deep gut level, you're going to know that all of these laws of influence are crazy effective. As Jim Rohn once wisely put it, never underestimate the power of influence. So once you embrace the laws, all you've got to do, put them into practice. The ability to influence people in the world of B2B sales is becoming increasingly important as our prospects and our customers are constantly distracted by technology, by beeps, by buzzes, by alarms, by alerts. They're constantly distracted. And so you might only get one shot to get your point across. You might only get one shot on the phone to persuade the prospect to meet with you in person or to just discuss your product. And your prospect has likely been bombarded with pitches, and so those first impressions and that chance to get in front of them and influence them the first time around really counts. The ability to influence through understanding a step-by-step process, which we'll go through in this video, is a highly valuable asset that is only going to increase in its value over time. There is huge bang for buck from taking in this content and putting it into practice every single day. So let's jump in to the first law of influence. And the first law of influence is the law of reciprocation. This is the law that describes the phenomenon that when people help us, we're instinctively drawn to help them back. We're hardwired this way from human evolution. Confucius once said that there is a rule of practice which may serve as a rule of practice for one's life: reciprocity. Reciprocation allows us to live in a tribe, to all have our own little jobs, our own little bubbles, and thrive as a community. Because individuals have their own little roles, and we know that what we do for them, what we put into the community, we're going to get back out to us. You look after the children, and someone else is going to bring back the food for lunch. We'll go out to hunt, we'll go and spear some elk or whatever, whatever caveman ate, and someone else is going to make the spears that we're going to use. When you help someone, they feel obligated to help you back, whether they want to or not. It sparks an innate drive. And sometimes this can even have a negative effect, where our prospects will go out of their way not to become indebted to us, but we'll come back to that later on. The law of reciprocation allows you to be proactive as an influencer. It gives you the opportunity to add crazy amounts of value up front, so you can call it up as a Godfather-style debt later on. You're literally going to give your prospects an offer that they can't refuse. The next law of influence is the law of consistency and commitment. The law of consistency and commitment works because you, I, and our prospects, well, our brains are dumber than what we think they are. We all have egos, and once we buy into a product or even a pattern of thought or action, we don't like to change our minds. We don't like to show other people that perhaps we were wrong. This has led to huge mistakes in both business and even bigger mistakes that have led to wars over the years, decades, and centuries. This law in B2B sales is both your best friend and it can be your worst enemy. It's your best friend in the fact that if you can get a prospect to agree to just one thing, then the chance of them becoming a customer actually leap up dramatically. But it's also your worst enemy, because if a prospect has already committed to the evil, terrible, dark side of the competition, then it's difficult to convert them back over to you. This is because it takes two things. It takes convincing them that they were wrong. And no matter how you spin it, how much responsibility you manage to take off their plate, take away from them, you've got to convince them that they were just wrong in the first instance. And two, you've got to get them comfortable enough to admit all of this to their colleagues. At best, they're going to feel, dumb for screwing up, and at worst, they could get sacked for having made a decision which cost the organisation they work for a shit ton of cash. So you have to pick and choose your battles with the competition. The best times to attack are when the law of consistency and commitment are weak. This is when the competition has made a huge mistake and perhaps the end users or the decision maker, whoever, they're mad. Or perhaps a new person has got involved with the decision making process, and so they can weaken this commitment because they go, well, I didn't make this decision. Let's see what other options are out there. Now, the flip side of all of this is that if there is new business up for grabs, typically the first person who is able to get some kind of commitment from the prospect before your competition jumps in, gets on the scent and gets into the account, then you're likely to do well. The first person in, the first person who's asking the questions, the first person who's doing the discovery, the first person who gets emails going back and forth, they typically tend to win the business. And the law of consistency works because our brains don't like to work very hard. You're going to see a theme here in this video on that front. But if we start the ball rolling down the hill of a decision being made, that first little decision, it's far easier than just to agree and let it continue to build momentum. If it's a snowball going down a snowy hill, it's getting bigger and bigger and harder to turn around at this point. People tend to just agree and they want things to keep moving along. They want to give away control. They want just action, action, action. If you don't believe me, ask Dwayne Johnson, who once said that success isn't always about greatness. It's about consistency. Consistent hard work leads to success. Greatness will come. Now ask yourself, would The Rock ever lie to you? I don't think so. The fascinating thing about this particular law is that once we've made a decision, people tend to then proactively look around the environments to find evidence to support the decision that they have made. They're never going to look for evidence that's contrary to the decision that they've made, even though it's probably there, it might even exist. So once your prospect agrees to work with you, you've got everything going in your favor. Next is the law of social proof. And again, this works because our brains are goddamn lazy. There's hacks here. There's tons of hacks for all of this. When there is social proof that something is the correct decision, we just accept it rather than trying to figure it out for ourselves. Now, this is because we couldn't possibly look into every single decision that we make. There just isn't enough time in the day, and we'd be shattered when we're just crossing the road, for example. Instead, we wait for other people to start crossing the road, even if it's just in our peripheral vision that we see them moving as we're staring down at our phone, emailing and closing the deal. Typically, we walk when we see movement. We're not looking for cars, we're taking it on the assumption that other people aren't crazy idiots and they're not crossing the road ready to be mowed down by a red London bus. That is how powerful social proof is. We're ready to walk semi-blind into potential oncoming traffic. That's how powerful it is. Additionally, social proof helps protect our egos and our B2B buyer egos as well. If all of these people are doing this thing, if they're all buying it, well, you're not going to feel half as silly as if you went out on a limb and did something unique and then it all goes to shit. If everyone gets screwed over, well, you're just part of a crowd now, as opposed to the individual who put their neck on the line And you shouldn't have done that, you should have just gone with the sheep. It's far easier to argue that, well, everyone was doing it versus, well, I was wrong. And this is very important in the corporate B2B world, and it's why we have industry standard products, hardware, software, and services such as Salesforce.com. It's the safe bet, everyone's using it. And for most B2B buyers, when they're not spending their own money to make these purchases, and if they go wrong, if they screw up, they might get sacked and they lose all the security, their mortgage goes tits up, their family leaves them, whatever the end consequences of losing their job is, they're going to go with the safe bet, right? They're going to go with the industry standard, whatever that is, most of the time. Now, congratulations if that's your product, if you are pushing, if you're selling the industry standard, which I've done in my medical device sales roles. I've always gone for those companies very specifically because of this law of influence. Well, congratulations. And unlucky if you're not selling an industry standard product. It's going to take some serious work to drive those prospects to buy if they're risk averse and you're not some kind of standard. Social proof is something that affects people's buying habits all of the time, both in B2B sales and out of it as well. According to the consumerist.com, 70% of customers use online reviews to judge whether or not to purchase something. And this goes deeper on websites such as Netflix, where they have the thumbs up, thumbs down. On YouTube, where there's thumbs up and thumbs down and comment sections and all this good stuff as well. We're coming to the middle of these laws now, because the next one is likability. And you know the cliche? I talk about it all the time in the sales school, on the podcast, on salesman.org, everywhere we publish content. The cliche is people buy from those that they know, that they like, likability, and they trust. There is a ton of scientific evidence that proves that we buy from those that we feel we are similar to. And going back to our tribal days, we're programmed to trust the people in our tribe and fear those that are not in our tribe. So this makes total sense. Because if your brain, again, it being lazy here, it being a proper lazy bastard of all of these things, if your brain had to work out who it could trust in each and every interaction that you had, then you'd never get anything done. You'd never get any conversation going because you'd still be going, can I trust this dude? Can I trust this girl? Instead, it uses these kind of shortcuts. So, likability leads to more trust, which means less uncertainty, which means it's easier to close deals with these individuals. So, how do we become likable? Well, this comes down to just building rapport and just being a good person. So you've got to ignore these stereotypes of arrogant, cocky, loudmouth sales professionals, because they're no longer useful in the world of B2B sales. When you go from the perspective of the buyer, all of this is so crazy easy to understand. People would rather work with people who they are friendly with, people that they are happy to spend time with, versus the cold calling salesperson who's pestering the crap out of that individual 24 hours a day. It makes total sense, right? For us, that means finding out what your prospects like to do, both in business and in their spare time, what interests they have. And then you can try and find some overlap between what you're into and what they're into. Just get into a conversation about that before you start pitching, and your chances of closing the deal go up dramatically. The law of authority. The law of authority is perhaps the easiest law to use, to implement, to put into practice, but it's the hardest from a mindset perspective to implement. You have the ability, right this second, to call yourself an expert in your industry. How did that make you feel when I said that? Most people, they go, oh, I don't know about that. I don't think I'm the expert. I don't want to put that in my LinkedIn status. I just want to be a salesperson. I just want a phone call. I don't want all that responsibility, that pressure. Well, you are an expert in your industry, whether you like it or not. If you've been working in sales for more than a year, 2 years in one specific vertical, you know more about your product and your service and how to sell and facilitate the sale than pretty much anyone else out there, right? Case in point, you're an expert. Authority is another shortcut that our brain uses to do less processing day to day, but still survive. Again, it comes down to the days that we lived in tribes and there was a hierarchy there. If everyone thought that they were in control, if everyone was bossing each other around and there was no hierarchy, clearly a community can't form. There is a ton of research data on the power of authority, from the horrific things that the German and Allied soldiers did in World War II because they were told to the electrocution experiments of Stanley Milgram. There's also a famous Stanford prison experiment where volunteers were given roles as fake prison guards or fake prisoners. And within just 6 days, the guards began abusing their power because they could. Just the fact that one set of the participants were dressed up in officer uniform or prison guard uniform and the other people were dressed up in prisoner uniform, the prisoners gave so much responsibility, so much authority to these people who were just random people. They could have been placed in either group. They just happened to be in this group. The abuse got that bad that they had to cancel the experiment. How scary is that? This all works because when we accept someone else's authority, we give a little bit of freedom away. But we're returned with more liberation. Because when we do something that someone who has authority tells us to, we can't be held responsible for our mistakes. And so we're willing to take more risk. If you as a salesperson have more authority in your industry, if you are an expert, if you've been, for example, through our industry hero training, personal branding and all that kind of stuff, you can find that over at industryhero.org. If you've been through that, selling becomes far easier because people trust what you're saying. You don't have to pitch, you don't have to sell, people just do what you suggest. And this is exactly what we need when selling in B2B, because if we're doing especially the bigger deal sizes, there's a lot of risk from moving from one supplier to another, getting them to come on board with us, getting them to implement a new service or product for their end users if we're selling to middle management and they're not actually using the product. There's a lot of trust that needs to be in place for them to take action. So scarcity is the final law of influence, and it's probably the easiest to leverage as well. All you've got to do is to make your product harder to buy and strategically, and people are going to want it more. How crazy is that? Again, our lazy brains, completely lazy brains, just take another shortcut here. And when they see something that is difficult to get hold of, they make the assumption that it must be incredible, it must be the best, it must be fantastic, otherwise there'll be loads of it around. If it's difficult to get hold of, it must be popular, and so it must be better than everything else that's in the market. Now, classic example of this, the iPhone sells out every single time it's updated. Now, do you not think that 10, 12, how many years in now since the first iPhone, do you not think that Apple have enough data to build enough of them ahead of time? Of course they do. But they love the buzz of people not being able to get hold of it, and people are fighting for it, and people are queuing up, and that gets covered on YouTube, it gets covered on the magazines, it gets covered in the news, and so they get a ton of promotion over the fact that people want this product and they can't quite get their hands on it just yet. In a few days' time, after the launch, it's all perfect. There's a ton of them, but that initial push, they do it on purpose because they're leveraging the law of scarcity. Additionally, if there is limited alternatives to your product or service, it automatically increases in value. So I have to go with either Windows or Mac as an operating system. And so essentially they can charge whatever they like as long as they're both relative to each other. And getting slightly deeper here, on a real deep human level, the only things that we're programmed to do is stay alive long enough to procreate and then look after our children. It's as simple as that. All the psychology, all we're talking about here comes down to those two goals that we have hardwired into our DNA. So if there are limited resources, we're programmed to grab everything we can, to hoard it, to make ourselves ill on ice cream, for example, because our brain is hardwired to find, track down, and gorge ourselves on this sugar that should be a scarce resource in our environment when obviously it isn't really anymore, but 5,000 years ago, it was real scarce. Thomas Sowell has a real interesting quote in which he states, "The first lesson in economics is scarcity. There is never enough of anything to satisfy those who want it." And so it's human nature to want the things more that we perceive as rare or hard to get hold of. It fills some kind of strange hole in our ego about feeling important and owning something of worth, which increases our own self-worth. I want this GTR not because I need a car to get me from A to B. I've got a nice BMW that does it. I want this car because it's scarce. I want this car because it does 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds. Am I ever going to experience that? Probably I'll launch the car twice and be like, okay, great, well, it costs me £4 in petrol every time I do it. But that scarcity is what makes it epic. It's what makes it awesome. And so how do we implement this very practically as a B2B salesperson? Well, you can strategically limit the time that you have to share with your customers. You shouldn't give your time away for free. You shouldn't be available just 24/7. You should make it so that when your prospects call you, say, hey, I'll call you back in a couple of hours. I've got an hour slot there in my diary. Does it line up with your diary? Are we both going to be sat there? Are we both going to be ready? We're going to be prepared because I value your time. You should be valuing mine as well. You should use this as a tool to, even if it's just perceived, show prospects that you are oversubscribed. And if they see you as oversubscribed, they're going to value you high in the marketplace. They're going to get more value out of the conversation, out of the interaction. So everyone wins. And a final thing on this, don't be such a pushover with your time. Your time is the only non-renewable resource that you have. You don't have time to be faffing around listening to podcast aimlessly after podcast and then going to YouTube and trying to suss out what you need to learn and how you're going to learn it. And you go, do I trust this dude or I'm not sure about this woman. She wears a ridiculous power suit. I'm not sure on that. What you need to find is a system, a bunch of video, audio, written content. Clearly that's how people learn the best. Clearly that's how people take information when they go through the audio, the video, and the written side of things as well. You should find someone that you know, like, and you trust, and you should follow their system, especially if they've been there and they've done it as well. This works in both sales, if you want to learn piano, if you want to start racing cars, whatever it is. Your personal time is your most valuable resource. It's the only thing that you spend which you can never get back, right? You can spend money and you can invest it into stocks, shares, whatever, and you get your money back at the end of the month or the 5-year project or however you've invested it. Your time, once it's gone, it's gone. So you need to leverage it appropriately. People around you will try and suck your time, customers especially. So just be wary of all of that. And so there are the 6 laws of influence and hopefully a few ways that you can implement them into your daily B2B selling activities. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you click subscribe and do me a favor. If you enjoyed this, I've spent hours putting in, you would not believe the amount of time it takes to edit these videos, to come up with the scripts, to go through the ideas. Want to do me a favor, if you've got any value from this, leave a comment below this box, below this video. Just leave a quick comment, tell me what you'd like me to share on this channel and I'll make it for you. And so with that said, I'll speak with you again on tomorrow's Sales School video.